When a narcissistic woman realizes that she no longer has psychological dominance over you, something subtle yet irreversible takes place. Control for her was never about love or connection. It was about certainty. Certainty that your emotions could be activated, redirected, or destabilized on command. The moment that certainty disappears, the relationship quietly ends, long before any physical departure occurs. You see, narcissistic control is not maintained through strength, but through reaction. Your explanations, your anger, your attempts to be understood, all of these once confirmed her relevance in your inner world. But when those reactions fade, when your responses become measured or absent altogether, her influence loses its grip. This is not because you have become cold, but because you have become centered. And centered individuals are psychologically ungovernable. From a depth psychology perspective, something profound happens here. As Carl Jung observed, what we cannot control in others often reflects what we cannot face within ourselves. When she can no longer provoke you, she is confronted with her own internal instability. The power dynamic reverses, not through confrontation, but through your composure. Silence, in this context, is not avoidance, it is sovereignty. A narcissistic woman may test this shift at first. She may provoke, withdraw, or attempt to reassert dominance through subtle manipulation. But when each attempt meets the same calm neutrality, the psychological contract dissolves. She understands intuitively that the version of you she once controlled no longer exists, and narcissism cannot survive where it cannot dominate. This is why she does not come back, not because she stopped caring, but because returning would mean engaging with someone she cannot influence. And influence, not intimacy, was the foundation all along. So the question is not how to make her leave forever. The question is whether you are willing to reclaim your inner authority so completely that her presence or absence no longer defines you. Because the moment you master that, control ends and freedom begins. When you stop supplying emotional energy, the dynamic shifts in a way that is deeply unsettling for a narcissistic woman. This is because narcissism does not feed on connection. It feeds on stimulation, praise, anger, longing, explanations, even suffering. These are all forms of nourishment. As long as you are emotionally invested, she feels alive, affirmed, and powerful. The tragedy is that many people believe silence means indifference, when in truth, silence is often the first sign of psychological maturity. Emotional supply is not something she consciously negotiates. It is something she instinctively draws from those around her. Your attention becomes proof of her significance. Your pain becomes evidence of her impact. But the moment you withdraw that energy, not dramatically, not resentfully, but calmly, you introduce a vacuum. And that vacuum is terrifying. In it there is no reflection, no validation, no confirmation of importance. From a deeper psychological lens, this is where the structure begins to crack. As Carl Jung emphasized, the psyche seeks balance. When external supply disappears, the narcissistic individual is forced inward, yet the inward world is precisely what she has spent her life avoiding. It contains insecurity, fragmentation, and unresolved emptiness. Rather than face that inner terrain, she looks elsewhere, anywhere, for fresh emotional fuel. This is why explanations do not work, arguments do not work. Even forgiveness can fail when it still carries emotional charge. What works is neutrality. When your words no longer carry heat, when your presence no longer carries urgency, the emotional economy collapses. You are no longer a source. And without a source, attachment becomes pointless. Importantly, this withdrawal is not punishment, it is not revenge, it is a reclamation of energy that never should have been drained in the first place. You stop investing in a system that only rewards your depletion. In doing so, you do not just starve the narcissistic dynamic, you nourish yourself. Why she does not come back? Not because she has healed, but because the cost of returning is emotional self-confrontation. and that price is too high for someone dependent on external supply. So reflect on this carefully. Every time you withhold unnecessary emotional energy, you are not losing power. You are gathering it. And when your energy returns to you, the cycle ends and a new life quietly begins. When you establish unshakable inner boundaries, the relationship reaches a point of no return, not through conflict, but through clarity. A narcissistic woman does not fear boundaries announced loudly. She fears boundaries that no longer need to be explained, because explanation implies negotiation, and negotiation implies access. True boundaries are internal decisions, not external speeches. At first, boundaries may look simple. You no longer tolerate disrespect, emotional volatility, or inconsistency. But psychologically, something much deeper is happening. You are no longer organizing your inner life around her moods, needs, or reactions. Your time, attention, and emotional availability stop being endlessly adjustable. And the narcissistic psyche senses this shift immediately, even if nothing is spoken aloud. From a depth psychological standpoint, boundaries represent the emergence of the self. As Carl Jung understood, individuation begins the moment a person separates their identity from the projections of others. When you stop allowing someone to define your worth, you step out of the role they assigned you. For a narcissistic woman, this is not merely disappointing, it is destabilizing. The dynamic depended on your permeability. This is why she may test you. She might push limits subtly, cross lines accidentally, or provoke emotional reactions to see if the old access still exists. But when each test meets the same steady response, no justification, no collapse, no pursuit, she realizes something final. The doors are no longer unlocked from the inside. And a narcissist does not return to a place where entry is permanently restricted. What matters here is that these boundaries are not fueled by anger. Anger still binds you. They are fueled by self-respect, which frees you. You no longer argue your value, you embody it. You no longer threaten distance, you live from it. And distance, when rooted in self-clarity, becomes untouchable. This is the moment she leaves for good, not because she suddenly understands you, but because she understands herself in relation to you, and that relationship no longer serves her need for dominance. So ask yourself this: are your boundaries something you defend or something you live by? Because the moment your limits become non-negotiable truths rather than emotional reactions, manipulation loses its grip, and your life quietly returns to your control. When you no longer seek validation or closure, the psychological bond finally dissolves. This is one of the most misunderstood turning points, because many people believe closure is about healing. In reality, in narcissistic dynamics, closure is often the last thread of attachment. It is the hope that if you explain yourself clearly enough, if you are finally understood, the pain will make sense. But narcissistic relationships were never built on mutual understanding. They were built on asymmetry. As long as you seek validation, you remain psychologically available. You are still asking the other person to confirm your reality, your worth, or your experience. For a narcissistic woman, this is not an act of connection, it is an act of power. Your need to be seen keeps her positioned as the authority over meaning. And meaning in the psychological realm is everything. Shift happens when you realize that understanding does not need permission. When you stop asking, why did this happen? And start accepting this happened, and that is enough. Something internally realigns. From a depth psychological perspective, this is the movement from external orientation to inner authority. As Carl Jung emphasized, maturity begins when the individual stops seeking themselves in the mirror of another's approval. The psyche stabilizes when it no longer depends on external confirmation. A narcissistic woman senses this immediately. She may attempt to reopen conversations, offer partial explanations, or even appear reflective. But these gestures are not about resolution, they are about re-entry. Closure offered by someone who once controlled the narrative is rarely closure at all. It is an invitation back into confusion. When you decline that invitation, not with hostility, but with quiet certainty, you remove the final leverage. There is nothing left to negotiate. No emotional loose ends. No unanswered questions demanding engagement. Your understanding becomes self-contained. This is why she does not come back. Not because everything has been resolved, but because there is nothing left to control. A narcissist cannot anchor themselves in someone who no longer needs answers from them. So consider this carefully. Closure is not something you receive. It is something you decide. And the moment you stop asking for permission to move on, you reclaim authorship of your own life. That is not avoidance. That is psychological freedom. When you transform pain into self-mastery, the entire meaning of the relationship changes. What once wounded you no longer defines you, it refines you. This is the point where suffering stops being something that happened to you and becomes something that worked on you. And for a narcissistic woman, this transformation is the most final separation of all. In narcissistic dynamics, pain often served a purpose. Your confusion kept you close. Your self-doubt kept you pliable. Your emotional exhaustion made you easier to influence. But when that same pain is metabolized into insight, discipline, and inner strength, the role you once played disappears. You are no longer reacting, you are evolving. And evolution disrupts every fixed power structure. Psychologically, this is a profound shift. You stop asking how to avoid pain and start asking what pain is trying to teach you. From this perspective, suffering becomes an initiatory experience rather than a personal failure. As Carl Jung understood, the psyche grows not by bypassing darkness, but by integrating it. When you face what hurt you and extract meaning from it, you reclaim the parts of yourself that were fragmented by the relationship. A narcissistic woman may sense this change even from a distance. Your tone is different. Your choices are firmer. Your presence carries less urgency and more direction. You are no longer seeking relief through her recognition. You are building a life that stands independently of her memory. This is not something narcissism can engage with. It offers no leverage. Importantly, self-mastery is not about proving anything. It is not about success as revenge or strength as performance. It is quiet, internal, rooted. You begin to regulate your emotions instead of outsourcing that regulation to another person. You choose discipline over obsession, meaning over rumination, growth over repetition. In doing so, you symbolically step beyond the psychological frame that once held you captive. This is why she does not return. Not because you became unreachable, but because you became unrecognizable to the version of you she once controlled. Returning would require her to confront the fact that what broke you also built you, and that is a truth narcissism cannot tolerate. So reflect on this. Pain that remains unexamined keeps you bound to the past, but pain transformed into mastery becomes the foundation of your future. And when you choose growth over grievance, you do not just move on. You rise beyond the cycle entirely. When she is forced to face herself through your absence, the dynamic reaches its true conclusion. This is not the drama of abandonment, nor the theatrics of revenge. It is something far more unsettling, the quiet removal of a mirror she depended on to exist. Your absence does not shout, it reveals. And what it reveals is precisely what the narcissistic psyche spends a lifetime avoiding, as long as you are present, reacting, engaging, explaining, or suffering. She could externalize her inner conflicts. Your emotional responses acted as a buffer between her and her own emptiness. But when you step away, cleanly, calmly, without spectacle, that buffer disappears. There is no longer a screen onto which she can project confusion, blame, or superiority. What remains is herself. From a depth psychological perspective, this is the most threatening experience imaginable. As Carl Jung taught, Whatever we refuse to confront within becomes fate. For the narcissistic woman, your absence turns the inner shadow unavoidable. Without your presence to regulate her sense of importance, she is left alone with unresolved insecurity, fragmentation, and fear. This is not reflection she welcomes, it is reflection she escapes. This is why she does not come back. Not because she feels nothing, but because returning would force self-recognition. And narcissism is structured to avoid recognition at all costs. To return would mean acknowledging that she depended on you more than she admitted. It would mean facing the truth that control replaced intimacy. That is a confrontation she is not equipped to endure. Your role here is not to punish, explain, or prove anything. Your role is simply to remain absent, not physically alone, but psychologically unavailable. Absence, when rooted in self-respect, becomes a boundary no manipulation can cross. It is not cruelty, it is clarity. And here is the deeper truth. Your absence is not meant to teach her a lesson. It is meant to complete yours. The moment you stop trying to be understood by someone incapable of self-understanding, the cycle closes. So consider this carefully. When you choose not to return to what diminished you, your absence becomes an act of integrity. And in that integrity you reclaim the final and most important power of all, the power to move forward without looking back.